Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another episode of Small Engines Questions and Answers. So today's my 90th Q&A video. It's hard to believe I've done so many. Anyways, there's not much new in the last week. We've had a bit of snow last weekend, about 8 inches here in Muskoka. So it looks a bit more like winter at this time, but it's getting warmer. I have a feeling that spring's just around the corner. And before I start off today, I want to welcome all the new subscribers to my channel. My first question today is regarding lawn tractors. A YouTuber asked me if that's normal, that he has to start his tractor with the throttle halfway up. On some tractors it's normal. I know that my lawn tractors start way better if I've got the throttle halfway up. Even on this little tractor here that's sitting in my shop, I'll start it with the throttle right at about here. It probably lets in more air into the carburetor and the fuel goes in much easier that way. And if your tractor runs good, then don't worry about it. Now the same principle can apply when you go to start your snowblower with a Tecumseh motor. I find that they start much better with the throttle halfway up. Just like on this engine here, when I start it, I put it at about here, and it always starts much better in this position. Another question I got from a YouTuber the other day, he says he manually files his chainsaws, and he was wondering how many times should I manually sharpen them before I take them in to get professionally sharpened. Well, what I recommend is after you've sharpened it 2-3 times by hand and you're not happy with the way the edge of the teeth are on the chain, then take it to get professionally sharpened. I can't see a problem with sharpening it 2-3 times by hand. Also, some people are really good at doing it manually that they never need to get them professionally sharpened. But some people may have a harder time doing this by hand, so maybe for them, they're best to take it in after 2 or 3 times. You're going to realize soon enough if your chain needs to be professionally sharpened, because it's not going to cut straight, it's not going to cut good, and you're just not going to be happy with it. I do recommend that you do not use the chainsaw if the chain is not properly sharpened, because it can be just as dangerous as having a sharp chain. Actually, it could be more dangerous. And it's not good for your engine because it may be over revving because it's not grabbing into the wood enough to slow down the RPMs of your chainsaw. Another question I got about chainsaws the other day is, why is my chainsaw vibrating in my hands? The most likely reason for that is that the motor mounts are all shot. They need to be replaced. So depending on your chainsaw, they may be found underneath over here. There may be some over here. There's one over here on this chainsaw as well. And if they get worn out, everything's going to vibrate from the handle to the engine because they're separated over here. And if they're shot, there will be a lot of movement and vibration. And on this Husky 50 carcass over here, you can see that there's a motor mount right here. There's one down here. These are still good, but you can see here if it's even loose in its place, how the handle is going to be loose from the body of the engine over here. So always check the motor mounts and make sure that they're in good condition. Now there can also be another culprit that could be causing your chainsaw to vibrate excessively, and it's rare that I see this. But if any of the fins are broken on the flywheel, it's going to cause it to be imbalanced. Kind of like having an imbalanced tire on your car, you can feel a vibration. So it's the same thing with the engine on your chainsaw. Always double check the flywheel to make sure that no fins are broken. And you also may want to check the clutch that none of the parts inside are broken or cracked or missing. If any pieces are broken or missing from here, it will make your engine vibrate. So double check these things first before you spend any money on other things. Another question I often get is in regards to adding a starter to a snowblower with a Tecumseh motor. People always ask me, what is it that I need when I'm going to install a starter? Well, obviously you need the starter, but the most important thing you need to make sure is that there is a ring gear on your flywheel. So people are wondering, how do I know that? Well, what I have here is an older Tecumseh motor. Usually the starter is always underneath the fuel tank on these engines. And if you look at the spot on the engine where the electric starter would go, you're going to see a metal plate here. That's because there's no starter here, so they've blocked up the hole. You take this Phillips screw out, you pull out the metal plate, and you should see a ring gear on the flywheel. And this one here is ready to accept a starter. If there's no ring gear on the flywheel, then what you need to do is to get a flywheel with the ring gear. Because if there's no ring gear there, there's nothing for the starter to grab onto. So it's that simple, and I do recommend that if you do not have a starter on your snowblower, that you do plug the hole with the proper metal plate like this, because this will stop the snow from getting in there and getting on your points or your ignition module. And this is what a typical starter will look like for your Tecumseh snowblower engine. And they can range anywhere from between $100 to $200 brand new. If you can find a good used one for under $100, then grab it. Make sure it's in good working order though before you pay that money, because sometimes you're better off to spend more money and have a brand new product. Another question I got the other day is, what's a good way to tap in some crank seals on a crankshaft? Well, a good way is to use a socket that is exactly the same size as the oil seal you have. What I have here is an older oil seal, and I've matched it up to a socket just to show you. You always want to match up the socket to the outside part of the seal. And then when you put it in, you just tap the socket lightly with a hammer. You can always put a piece of wood over here and then tap it in, or use a brass hammer if you don't want to cause any damage or have sparks. And then just tap it in. So depending on your oil seal, just use a different sized socket. It always works good, and you never end up damaging anything if you use the proper size. Now often I get people ask me, what kind of carburetor do these ice augers have? This is a Tecumseh motor, and it's a 2-stroke. I've got the carburetor off. And the thing I want to tell you today is, even though it says Tecumseh on the carburetor, this carburetor is actually made by Tillotson. So when you go to get parts for this carburetor, you don't need to get a Tecumseh part. You can buy a Tillotson carb kit. And the kit for that carburetor is RK-21HU. That's the repair kit with the needle and hardware that goes with it. Right now I've got this one apart, and also on the plastic part it says Tecumseh on it. What often happens with these carburetors is these plastic pump covers that go on the other part of the carb here end up warping. And what happens is you end up with an air leak or a gas leak coming out of the carb, and then you've always got to adjust the carburetor every day. So I ordered this part here because it's warped over here where it sits on the carburetor. But yeah, anyways, I just thought I'd tell you guys that about the carb kit, how you can cross-reference like that. If you're not sure what kit it takes, you can always take the diaphragms out and look up on eBay. And sometimes you can just tell by looking at pictures exactly what kit it is that you need. Some of these older ice augers though have a different carburetor setup, and it's an actual Tecumseh carburetor that uses a different carb kit. But most of the more modern ones have a little diaphragm carburetor like I just showed you. And before I end off today, I just want to show you how sometimes a spark plug can become defective. Just take a close look at this one. See how I can turn the porcelain off the plug? And there's actually compression or air coming out in between the plug here and the porcelain when you turn the engine over. So it's something that can be easily overlooked. Always double check. It's really rare that I see this, but you just never know. So that's about all the time I have for today. I appreciate you guys watching. Hopefully you guys will have a nice Friday today and a nice evening and a great weekend. So take care, and we'll see you next week.